Hello everyone. You can see I've got my assistant Nye with me here again today. And today's story is called The Wooden City. There was once a poor king. He had a threadbare robe and patches on his throne. The reason he was poor was that he gave away all his money to whoever needed it, for he cared for his people as if each of them were his own child. One day, however, a wizard came to the city while the king was away. The wizard summoned all of the people to the main square and said to them, "Make me your king, and you shall have all the gold and silver you wanted." The townsfolk, however, would not agree. So the wizard said to them, "Make me your king, or I will turn you into wood." But still the townsfolk would not agree. Whereupon the wizard climbed to the top of the tallest tower in the city. He took a live dove and tore out its feathers one by one and dropped them out of the tower, chanting, "Feather touch the earth, and another turns to wood." Now that poor dove had as many feathers on its back as there were people in that city. And by the time the wizard had finished, everyone in the city had been turned to wood. When the king arrived back, he found the gates of the city shut up and no one to open them. So he sent his servant to find out what was the matter. The servant returned, saying he could not find the gatekeeper, but only a wooden mannequin dressed in the gatekeeper's uniform, standing in his place. At length, however, the gates were opened, and the king went into the city. But instead of cheering crowds, he found only wooden people, each standing where they had been when the wizard had cast his spell. There was a wooden shoemaker sitting working on a pair of new shoes. Outside the inn was a wooden innkeeper pouring some beer from a jug into the cup of a wooden old man. Wooden women were hanging blankets out of the window or walking wooden children down the street. And at the fish shop, a wooden fishmonger stood by a slab of rotten fish. And when the king entered his palace, he even found his own wife and children turned to wood. Filled with despair, he sat down on the floor and wept. Whereupon the wizard appeared and said to the king, "What will you give me if I bring your people back to life?" And the king answered, "Nothing would be too much to ask. I would give you half my kingdom." So the wizard set to work. He ordered a quantity of the finest wood and took the most delicate tools with golden screws and silver pins. And he made a little wooden heart that beat and pumped for everyone in the city. Then he placed one heart inside each of the wooden citizens and set it working. One by one, each citizen opened its wooden eyes and looked stiffly around, while its wooden heart beat, tunka, tunka, tunka. Then each wooden citizen moved a wooden leg and a wooden arm, and then one by one they started to go about their business as before, except stiffly and awkwardly, for they were still made of wood. The wizard appeared before the king and said, "I have come to claim half your kingdom." "But," cried the king, "my people are still made of wood. You have not truly brought them back to life." "Enough life to work for me," cried the wicked old wizard, and he ordered the wooden army to throw the king out of the city and bolt the gates. The king wandered the world, begging for his food and seeking someone who could bring his subjects back to life. But he could find no one. So in despair, he took work as a shepherd, minding sheep on a hill that overlooked the city. And there he would often stop travellers as they passed to and fro and ask them how it was in the great city. "It's fine," they would reply. "The citizens make wonderful clocks and magnificent clothes woven out of special metals, and they sell these things cheaper than anywhere else on earth." One night, however, the king determined to see how things were for himself. So he crept down to the walls and climbed in through a secret window and went to the main square. There, an extraordinary sight met his eyes. Although it was the dead of night, every one of those wooden citizens was working as if it had been broad daylight. None of them spoke a word, however, and the only sound was the tunka, tunka, tunka of their wooden hearts beating in their wooden chests. The king ran from one to the other, saying, "Don't you remember me? I am your king." But they all just stared at him blankly and then hurried on their way. At length, the king saw his own daughter coming down the street carrying a load of firewood for the wizard's fire. He caught hold of her and lifted her up and said, "Daughter, don't you remember me? Don't you remember you're a princess?" But his daughter looked at him and said, "I remember nothing. I am only made of wood." So the king leapt onto a box in the main square and cried out, "You are all under the wizard's spell. Help me seize him and cast him out." But they all turned with blank faces and replied, "We are only made of wood. We can't do anything." Just then the wizard himself appeared on the steps of the palace, arrayed in a magnificent robe of gold and silver, and carrying a flaming torch. "Ha ha!" he cried. "So you thought you'd undo my work, did you? Very well." And he raised his hands to cast a spell upon the king. But before he could utter a single word, the king seized the bundle of firewood that his daughter was carrying and hurled it at the wizard. At once, the flame from the wizard's torch caught the wood, and the blazing pieces fell down around him in a circle of fire that swallowed him up. And as the fire raged, the spell began to lift. The king's daughter and all the others shivered, and the tunka, tunka, tunka of their wooden hearts changed to real heartbeats, and they each turned back into flesh and blood. And when they looked where the wizard had been, there in his place they found a molten heap of gold and silver. This the king had raised up on a pedestal in the main square, and underneath he had written the words, "Whoever needs gold or silver may take from here." But do you know, not one of those townsfolk ever took a single scrap as long as they lived. I wonder if it's still there. Well, thank you very much for listening, everyone, and we'll see you again soon.